Hello, my name is Dr. Peter Story. I'm a professor at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. And today I'm going to be presenting on securing your digital information from security threats. And this talk is specifically targeted for the needs of journalists. And a little bit about myself before we get started. So my specialty is usable security and privacy. So my research focus is trying to get people to adopt security and privacy tools to protect themselves. And I'll go into some of those tools in this talk, telling you what tools I recommend, what tools are not as effective. And I earned my PhD from Carnegie Mellon. And yeah, right now I'm doing research on trying to protect journalists. And so if this information is useful to you and you want to learn more, please get in touch. I'll share my contact information later in the presentation. All right, I'll share my screen and then we'll get started. Okay, so my talk today is going to help you defend yourself against digital security threats. Attackers might seek to disrupt newsroom operations, steal sensitive information, or even endanger you or your sources. So for your protection, you should develop a security plan. And this talk is going to help you develop your own security plan. So first, some background. Journalists face diverse kinds of security threats. One example, Ben Hubbard covers the Middle East at the New York Times, and his phone was hacked by sophisticated malware. He was reporting on Saudi Arabia, and other signs suggested that it was Saudi Arabia who compromised his phone. So it was actually hacked twice. And it's this commercial spyware that the NSO group sells to governments, which they use to hack into journalists and dissidents. And it's a very powerful technology. Here's a somewhat less sophisticated but very prevalent approach, which is email phishing attacks. So Gannett was hit with an email phishing attack. There was thousands of employee accounts compromised. It's not clear whether the attackers achieved any of their goals. There seemed to have been some financial motivation, trying to do some wire fraud, but maybe they did other things that weren't reported publicly. And another example, these hackers posted fake pro-Russia news on legitimate news websites. So they hacked into the real news websites and they posted stories that people probably thought were real because they were on a real news site, but were designed to discredit NATO. So you can see each of these is a different sort of threat. There's these sophisticated spyware, this sort of classic email, click the link, oh, now you have a virus and you got hacked, or going after the publishing side of the news agency. So different kinds of threats. So how can you protect yourself and your organization? So that's what this talk is all about. You need to develop a security plan. So you need to answer, what assets do you want to protect? How severe are the consequences if you fail to protect your assets? Which adversaries do you want to protect your assets from? How likely are adversaries to compromise your assets? And finally, what are you willing to do to protect your assets? Can't just be thinking about this. You actually should make some steps to make yourself a more difficult target. So the first question, what are your assets? There's many things. You could have the identity of your sources. If you have an anonymous source, they're trusting you to protect their identity. And maybe they're afraid of retaliation. And maybe their employer wants to discover who's leaking information about the company. So you need to keep that source's identity secret. Newsroom personnel information is also an asset. Even something as simple as a list of all the names, home phone numbers, and addresses could be valuable for an attacker. Imagine someone who's going to harass a journalist. If they have their home address, they could use that to harass them. or calling them a bunch of times on their home phone, or even doing an impersonation. If you know a lot about someone, you can impersonate them and maybe get into some of their online accounts. Another thing to pay attention to are your website and your social media accounts. You want your newsroom's reputation to be preserved. If some garbage content is posted on your social media, people are going to unfollow you and you're going to lose your reputation. So protecting how you publish information is very important. So you should take a minute and think about, what are some of your other assets? What are some of the things that you need to protect? So a couple other ones that you should think about are your IT infrastructure, say your work laptop, your personal laptop, and also subscriber information, right? If subscribers hear a big data breach happened at your news agency, then maybe they'll unsubscribe and you'll lose some revenue. So these are all different assets, and you should think about what you're responsible for, what you can protect. So next, how severe are the consequences if you fail to protect your assets? So we'll just go into detail on a couple, but you should think carefully about all the assets that you've identified. So say the identities of sources. Sources could face retaliation if they're identified, and also your organization could lose credibility. If a source can't trust that you can keep their identity secret, then they're going to be less likely to talk to you off the record or anonymously. So also IT infrastructure. If your IT infrastructure, like your work devices or your file shares, are brought offline, then that's going to interfere with your reporting. Even if nothing is stolen, if you can't use any of your devices or access any of your files, that's going to really mess up day-to-day business. So you should think about this for each of the assets that you're responsible for. Next, let's talk about who are your adversaries. So many potential adversaries. For example, disgruntled staff. So someone who is trying to retaliate against their employer. They could steal devices. They could burn down the building as an office space. All sorts of things that someone with insider access could do. Say that you annoy a public figure like a celebrity. Many things could go wrong in that case. Imagine that celebrity's fans are going to be out to get you. There could be a harassment campaign. All sorts of things could happen. With organized cybercrime, there's often a financial motivation. So ransomware is a big issue where hackers will get into computer systems. They'll lock up all the files with encryption, and they'll say, you have to pay us to get access to your files again. And next, governments. Governments are a very scary adversary because they have a lot of resources. So Saudi Arabia has gone after journalists before, sometimes with deadly effect. So especially if you're investigating a government that has a history of going after journalists, it's worth taking that into account. So you should think for yourself, what adversaries do you have? You probably won't be able to think of every possible adversary, but you can probably think of some categories of entities. So next up, how likely are adversaries to compromise your assets? And this is an important question, but a very difficult question to answer, right? If someone told you someone is going to break into your office and steal your laptop tomorrow, then you know what you've got to do. You just don't put your laptop in your office tomorrow. But usually you don't know with 100% certainty that something's going to happen. So thinking about likelihood, there's different components that I think are useful to consider. So what are the capabilities of the attacker, and how motivated are they? And finally, how difficult a target are you? So let's first talk about capabilities. So I'll go in increasing order of technical sophistication. So someone who has authorized access but simply misuses it. So think about Jurassic Park, the IT guy, Dennis, who controls all the computer systems. He didn't have to hack into anything to mess up the whole park and release the dinosaurs. He just pushed the button. So people who have authorized access have the capability to use that access in an inappropriate way. Next off is device theft. So say you're at a coffee shop or something and you leave your laptop on the table. It doesn't take a genius to pick up someone's laptop and take it. So this is something I'm always careful about when I'm in public, is putting my laptop back in my bag and carrying it with me. Next up is shoulder surfing. So say you're in a public place, or say you're in a like an open plan office. It's easy for someone to just look over your shoulder and see what's on your computer. If you have someone who wants to be an anonymous source's name on your computer screen, you probably should be in a secure area where no one else can look over your shoulder and see that. Similarly, say your passwords and things like that, you don't want those in a Word document open up on your screen for anyone to walk by and see. So these are all things that don't require a lot of technical sophistication. Next, we'll go to things that are a little more sophisticated, but are well within the realm of possibility. So exploiting known vulnerabilities. So software is extremely complex, and because of that, there's a virtually unlimited number of ways to hack it. Now, the thing is, finding vulnerabilities takes resources. So there's sort of a life cycle of a vulnerability. So a vulnerability is discovered, and it depends on who discovers it. Is a researcher, or is it a cyber criminal? If a cyber criminal gets it, it may be sold to someone who is going to use that to go after high value targets. Eventually, this becomes known by the software developers and they patch it. And then they push out the patch Tuesday, etc., for all the devices. And if you install your updates, you're safe against those vulnerabilities. But the easy thing for a cyber criminal to do is to simply look at the software updates that came out and reverse engineer them. And then they see, oh, okay, that's how you hack into Windows 11.5. There's a bunch of vulnerabilities in here. And so then anyone who hasn't installed the update, they can easily get using those vulnerabilities. And there's tools like Metasploit that make it very easy to use these known vulnerabilities that have been out there for weeks and weeks and just combine them together to take over a device. So this is why installing software updates is so important. Next up are password reuse attacks. So you've probably heard the advice, don't reuse passwords on different websites. The reason is, if a website is breached, the attacker can sometimes discover the passwords used on that website. And there's different ways to do this, but regardless, in the end, they have a list of, say, email addresses and passwords. They can try those combination of email addresses and passwords on different sites. So say they hacked into MySpace, and you're using the same password for MySpace as you are for your work account. Then they use that MySpace email and password and your work account, and suddenly they're in. Again, this isn't rocket science to do this. It's just you've got the right information. Well, try it thousands of times, millions of times with different people's credentials, and you'll get a lot of success. Next up is phishing. So this is that thing where you get an email that says, hey, John, I need you to fill out this form, follow this link. So what happens when you follow that link, it sort of depends on the technical sophistication of the attack. If it's a sophisticated attack, clicking the link will take you to a website which will automatically hack your computer. If it's a less sophisticated link, it'll take you to a website that says something like, Zoom needs to update. Click here to download the update. You click it, you download it, you run it. Oh, it wasn't an update, it was malware. That's really easy to do. The automatic hacking is more sophisticated. Next would be surveillance. So say that you are, I don't know, traveling in a foreign country, say in China, and the government has influence over the internet service providers. They can simply keep track of what websites you access while you're in the country, because of course it passes through the internet service providers that they have a relationship with. And the US does surveillance similar to this as well. Next, this is the most sophisticated, I would say, but that doesn't mean it's rare. So exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities. So these are vulnerabilities that are not known. These are things that aren't just available to see in patches. The software vendor doesn't know about them yet. And what this means is that you can be hacked even if you've installed all your software updates. So you can even be hacked if you don't do anything. So simply by having your phone connected to the internet, the hacker could send you a WhatsApp message, an email, a text that has a malicious data in it. And then that malicious data can automatically compromise your device. Now, does everyone need to be afraid of these? Probably not, because these are valuable. They're something that can which is called a zero click. You don't have to do anything to take over someone's phone. That vulnerability, a vulnerability like that could sell for like $100,000 and up. So these are not something that someone's going to use to say get into your bank account. This is something that like Saudi Arabia would use to retaliate against a journalist. So those are zero-day vulnerabilities. And that news article I have there is suggesting that Jeffrey Bezos' phone was compromised by a message from the Saudi prince MBS sending a WhatsApp message to him. And this is part of what revealed his affair that Bezos was having. And as you may know, Bezos owns the Washington Post. So definitely close to home for journalists. All right, so these are all capabilities. Next, how motivated are your adversaries? This is really unpredictable. So if you have happy employees, maybe your staff aren't going to misuse their access. But if someone loses their job and they're just upset about it, they could cause damage. So this is a story about an employee wiping a bunch of servers because they were fired. Similarly, maybe you're on good terms with the government until you publish some kind of corruption or something like that, and then they want to go after you. So you can sort of imagine who might be motivated to hack you. Like maybe you don't think that France is going to go after you, but maybe you think other governments are going to go after you by hacking your devices. So you can get a little sense of this, but it is somewhat unpredictable. So to the bigger question, how likely are adversaries to compromise your assets? So these are the two things you don't really have control over. What capabilities does the attacker have, and how motivated are they? What you do have control over is how difficult a target are you. You can make yourself as difficult a target as you realistically can. And you can't do everything. You have limited time. If you try to do too much, you'll interfere with doing your job. But there are certain things that are low-hanging fruit and certain things you definitely should consider. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So what are you willing to do to protect yourself? So there's a set of practices that I think everyone should adopt. There's some practices that I think are useful in certain situations, and then there's a few practices that I'll tell you are ineffective and why I think they're ineffective. So first off, everyone should install security patches promptly. So the reason for this is as soon as the security patch is released, hackers will reverse engineer the security patch to discover the vulnerabilities that were fixed. And then anyone who doesn't install the security patch will be trivial for them to compromise. This is especially important for web browsers because simply visiting a website could cause your browser to be compromised. So this is why automatic updates are becoming a thing. But yeah, definitely installing them promptly is very important. And also, using a device that doesn't get updates is extremely dangerous because there'll be known vulnerabilities that aren't getting fixed. Now, the thing that scares people about updates is updates breaking things, right? And so this is one of my major pet peeves is when software is an update that introduces features or changes the way things work instead of just being a security update. It'd be nice to be able to just get those security updates and not worry about things breaking on your computer. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world. So for security's sake, you really should install security updates as soon as you can. Next, using strong, unique passwords. So you want to use a different password on every website, and you want that password to be long enough that it can't be easily guessed. The way to do this is using a password manager. So when you sign up for the website, the password manager will randomly generate a unique password, and it'll remember it for you, and then you won't have to type it, it'll just fill it in. So there's several nice things about this. So if the website that you've used the unique password on is hacked, you don't care. It's not your problem. The website will tell you got to reset your password, but the password the hackers got is not useful to them in any way. The second reason password managers are really good is because they protect you against phishing attacks. So say that you go to a website that says, type in your password here. How do you know if that website is legitimate or is an imposter website? Well, your password manager will mostly figure this out for you. It won't autofill things onto a totally unrelated website. So I don't know my passwords, except for a couple key accounts like my email. So for these other accounts, I can't be phished because I can't type them in. I have my password manager fill them in. And if it doesn't fill them in, that's a red flag for me. Next up, you should use two-factor authentication. And two-factor authentication is an extra layer of protection in case your password is compromised. So say that you did fall for a phishing attack and you typed in your password into an imposter website. Well, that isn't enough to get into a website if it's protected by two-factor authentication. You need this extra two-factor authentication code. So there's different ways that two-factor authentication is implemented. A classic way you've probably seen is with SMS messages, like a text message. The problem with this is that it's relatively easy for hackers to steal your phone number and then get your SMS messages or otherwise intercept them. So it's better to use a two-factor authentication that isn't SMS. So this can be something built into a browser like Safari or an authentication app like Duo or Google Authenticator. Next up, you should have your own backups. So your work might tell you, oh, we got you covered. We've got backups. Well, what if the backup system is hacked and wiped, right? You got to have your own backups. You should have a hard drive. I've got a hard drive right over there with all my backups on it. That way, even if my laptop is stolen or my laptop dies or my laptop is hacked, I know all the files are on that backup hard drive. And for security, I encrypt it so that it'll not be readable by someone who just picks it up out of my office. And finally, you should use disk encryption on all your devices. This is becoming a default now, but you can check that it's enabled. And this means that if your device is powered off, it's very difficult for someone who's stolen the device to get into the files on the device. And if you'll notice, all these screenshots I have are just screenshots from Mac OS. So none of these things requires you to install something new. You just have to use what's already available to you. Install your updates, use the password manager. If you don't have a strong preference, just use one built into your browser. Use two-factor authentication, ideally through your browser or through a password manager or an authentication app. Do your backups, like Time Machine works great on Macs. And then disk encryption to make sure that if your device is stolen, the information on it can't easily be read. So these are things everyone should do. They're very low effort and they're high benefit. Next up, when possible, what should you do? So use these when they make sense. So if you have a source whose identity shouldn't become known, you can use a code name for them. That way, say someone comes by your desk and they see what's on your screen, they'll just see the person's code name, not their real name. You can limit who has access to sensitive information. So this is compartmentalization. So this may mean not having a single shared folder that everyone in the office uses, but making sure that you have separate shared folders for different groups. And also keep in mind that whoever's managing the shared folder system probably has access to everything. So if you don't want them to have access, maybe you need to do something different. Maybe you need to have the files just live locally on a computer. But again, you have to think about who can remotely access your computer. You should use encrypted messaging when you have people who are willing to do that. So especially say I'm working with a student and sending passwords for servers around, I'll use an encrypted messaging app, and I can do things like have the message delete itself after an amount of time. And so this is good for security. What does it protect you from? Well, it protects you from Signal getting hacked or Signal getting subpoenaed. So if the service provider can't read your message, that's a good thing. It also, it gives you protection from, say, interception of the message in transit. So encrypted messaging is a good thing. You should also consider browsing anonymously with Tor Browser. So you have to think about who can see your web browsing. Your internet service provider can see it, and potentially with sort of traffic attacks, traffic can be rerouted through different sections of the internet. So there's been attacks that have rerouted internet traffic, say, through China. And so they could potentially see things that you're doing. So if you want to browse anonymously, Tor Browser lets you blend in with all the other Tor Browser users. Every time you restart the browser, you show up as a new user. And so this is a good way to make what you're researching blend in with all the other people who are looking at different things. Also, consider using burner devices if you're visiting a hostile country. So you're going through customs, they may take your device away from you. What are they going to do to it? Well, they may install a malware on it, or they might install a physical hardware backdoor. Who knows what they're going to do? So ideally, you have a device that you can just throw away after you've left the hostile country, and you're careful about what you log into when you're using that device in the country. And finally, isolating sensitive data behind an air gap. So this can be a sophisticated thing like a computer that's never hooked up to the internet, or it can be a simple thing like having things on paper in a locked cabinet in a locked room. And so, yeah, how can a hacker get into your filing cabinet if the thing only exists in your filing cabinet, right? So sometimes you need to have physical assurance that a hacker can't get information. And finally, let me point out a few of my practices that I dislike, that are ineffective. Scheduled password resets. This is counterproductive because it makes people choose weak passwords because no one can remember a new password every 6 months or so. You need to just have people choose a strong password and use that strong password until there's evidence that the password has been compromised. Also, commercial VPNs. Tor browser is a better solution than commercial VPNs. The issue with the commercial VPN is you're simply moving who can see your traffic from your internet service provider to the VPN provider. So how can you trust them? How can you trust they haven't been compromised? With Tor browser, at least there is some level of assurance that there's a certain number of devices that need to be compromised before your Tor traffic can be intercepted. So I'm going to summarize these capabilities and the different mitigations here. So this misuse of authorized access, how can you protect against that? How can you protect yourself against Dennis from Jurassic Park? You need to have internal controls, say requiring 2 people to authorize something before a wire transfer is sent. You should have compartmentalization so that a given person going rogue can't destroy the whole organization or get information from the whole organization. To protect against device theft, you should have disk encryption. You should have a strong password on your device. You should have the ability to remotely wipe your device. You should have backups in case your device is stolen, so you're not totally heartbroken about losing important information. And then physical security measures too, like keeping your device with you. For shoulder surfing, again, physical security measures like having a separate office instead of an open floor plan for your offices, using code names for sources whose identities shouldn't be known. To protect against known vulnerabilities, you've got to install your security patches promptly and have backups. Backups are good in case your device is hacked and say you have a ransomware attack. Well, if you have a backup, well, then you can just restore from your backup. For a password reuse attack, you should use a password manager, unique passwords on different websites, and 2-factor authentication. Protect against phishing. You should know what to look for in suspicious emails, but that's not totally foolproof. So you should have some technical measures as well, like using a password manager, so you don't even have a reflex to type your password. You should have a reflex to say the password manager is going to check if this website is legit. And also your device managers, like your IT department, can restrict what software is installed on your computer, so you can't accidentally install a Zoom update, for example, that is malware. To protect against surveillance, encrypted messaging like Signal and Tor Browser for anonymous browsing. And for zero-day attacks, these are the most challenging to defend against. You can have a strong security team that can help detect attacks before too much damage is done. You can have compartmentalization, so that an attack on one part of the organization doesn't compromise other parts of the organization, and also an air gap. Again, if you've got that filing cabinet with the crucial information in it, that's a lot more protected than just having on everyone's laptop. So another thing to think about is your organization making you vulnerable. Even if you do everything you can to protect yourself, your data is as secure as the least secure person who has access to it. So say you have a file share. If you put things on there and that everyone in your organization can read that, or 20 people can read it, if one of them is hacked, the hacker can get into the file share. With email, you send an email to someone. If either of you is hacked, that message will be readable by the attacker. And also the emails live on the server unencrypted. So if someone hacks the email server, they can read it. Or the IT department, they can do a password reset on your account, get into your email and read your email. If your device is managed, that probably lets your IT department remotely access it to do debugging, remotely install software. So if the IT department is compromised, they can compromise the managed devices. So this is a thing that really worries me is, what if your IT department is compromised, or what if your coworkers are compromised? So you should definitely spread the good news about security, hygiene, and best practices to your coworkers and anyone who you share sensitive information with, because them staying safe will keep you safe. So your homework is to develop your own security plan. So you should answer, which assets do you want to protect? How severe are the consequences if you fail to protect your assets? Which adversaries do you want to protect your assets from? How likely are adversaries to compromise your assets? And what are you willing to do to protect your assets? And if you scan this QR code, you can trust me, you'll go to a Google Doc where this is a template that you can modify. Or you can just type them up yourself if you don't trust me. So Next up, let me just chat a little bit about my research. So I'm giving this talk today, both because I want to help you guys protect yourselves, because journalism is super important, but also because I'm working on technology to help defend journalists. And I don't want to share too much about that because you're prospective participants. But if you're interested, please send me an email and I'll be conducting some paid research studies where you can help me build these tools to protect you. And finally, here are some links to resources that you can use to learn more about threat modeling, which is building these security plans, and more about these security threats. So again, please reach out, email me if you're interested in participating in research, or if you just want to discuss more about these topics. I'm always happy to meet to discuss. So thank you very much, and I hope to hear from you.